I just thought I'd show you guys something incredibly beautiful before we begin our video. Look, this is my cat. His name is Zeus. One of the most beautiful things ever, isn't he? Okay, guys, let's start our video. Hello guys, welcome, or if you've already seen my channel before, welcome back. I am the Philadelphia Whovian, and guys, for this video, yes, and those of you guys who are new to my channel, welcome. I should warn you in advance, I am one of those degenerate YouTubers who sits in front of the camera and just talks. That's how I am. I've warned you now. All I can say is, if you're going to watch this video and you just can't bear the idea of just watching someone talk for 20 minutes at a camera with nothing fancy going on, just eat some food or do some paperwork, but I beg of you, listen to the entire video, because here's the thing I've had before when I do videos, people watch the first 2 minutes of the video, they comment, and then I say, did you watch the entire video? And they watch the entire video and they realize their comment was stupid, because I addressed it later on. So if you're going to comment, watch the entire video. I'm just telling you now. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about how the idea of Doctor Who fandom and the reaction to American influence or American characters or American situations present in Doctor Who, and how I've encountered sometimes anti-American, sometimes Doctor Who fandom attitude can be anti-American in the sense where this video was inspired by the times where I've encountered people who believe that A, Americans should never be on Doctor Who, B, American influence should never be a part of Doctor Who, C, they don't like the idea of Doctor Who ever taking place in America, and D, they got mad at Moffat because during the first 3 seasons of Moffat's era, they thought there was a problem with the idea of Moffat trying to appeal to Americans and trying to conquer America with the first 3 seasons. Alright, these are the 4 main things I'm going to tackle, but also the idea of Doctor Who ever being anti-American. I'm going to bring that up later on, and how that was not actually right. Either way, make it very clear, guys. Whatever you feel is perfectly fine. I'm just saying this because if you have a problem with Americans, you don't like Americans at all, that's who you are, fine. But Doctor Who is not the place for that. And I'm going to explain to you from the very beginning to the end why that is the case. And also, I'm mostly doing this video, I want to make it very clear, this is not something I run into very often anymore. 3 years ago, by around Series 6, that's when I encountered a lot of anti-American feelings about America not being in Doctor Who, and people blaming Moffat, not liking the fact that Moffat included America in Series 6. But recently, that has dwindled out. I've only encountered 2 people who've had a problem with Moffat for trying to bring America into Doctor Who more in the 11th Doctor's era, or didn't like the idea of Americans ever being a part of Doctor Who. If you encounter that, and you do not agree with that, and I'm going to give you arguments to explain what you should say in these situations. Now, without further ado, for those people who think the idea of Moffat was wrong for including Americans through Season 5 and 7, as well as even eventually Series 10, or the idea of they don't believe Americans should have ever been in Doctor Who because they never were to before, here's what you can say. First, 1. Doctor Who was one of the main creators of Doctor Who was Sidney Newman, an American. One of the main creators of this show back in the 1960s was an American person. The main creator was Sidney Newman, who is an American. End of story. And then eventually the first director was technically an Indian, and the producer, she was British. You have 3 different voices in the original show happening at one time, which worked in the classic show's favor. Hence why it did such a good job. The classic Doctor Who did a good job of balancing out a British patriotism or the idea of national pride with international inclusion. The classic show did that very well because it was doing that from the very beginning. There was national pride, but there was also international inclusion at the same time. Basically, even with the creative team. Then the first season happens where William Hartnell is the Doctor. People often forget this, but the Doctor visited America in his very first season with the Aztecs. The location of the Aztec culture is technically still in North America, in America. And in that episode, the Doctor ended up having a romantic attachment to a woman and they became engaged. Now, she thought they were engaged. It was an accident for him, but he did go on to call her his fiancée. Yes, he did. The second he called her his fiancée, it became legit even to him. He had no problems even calling her that, and he even made it very evident he felt for her. This is an American female. Yes, it is. It's North America this resides in. She is an American female. So the first time we see the Doctor have a romantic connection on camera, we know he had romantic connections before this, but on camera was with an American female. The Doctor is not anti-American. Then the second season happens, and we have episodes like The Chase, where Ian looks up Abraham Lincoln when he did the Gettysburg Address in my home state. And Ian showed a love for this moment in history. But in that same episode of The Chase, we have the Doctor and the companions go to the Empire State Building in New York, which will be recycled later for the Russell T Davies era. And with that, then, on top of that, the Daleks also came to the Empire State Building as well. So Doctor Who was in full-on New York. The Doctor was in New York in his second season, 1964. In the third season, we had the Doctor again, a full-on American story with the gunfighters, taking place with, at the OK Corral, with the Earps and, the Clantons, that whole situation, etc. and so forth. So we have another history that takes place fully in America. And then in season 4, well, I kind of look at the First Doctor's last two stories being the end of season 3 that dipped into season 4. It does technically count that 10th planet is in season 4, but, whatever. So the 10th planet is a story where the British director, he said, I want an international cast. I want people from all parts of the world. That included American characters. This British director made it very evident, I want Americans in the show as well as other non-British people to really fill out the cast of this. And he succeeded, and it was a successful story. It introduced the Cybermen. Then we have I believe in the second Doctor's story of the Moon Base, there's a character in there, I admit because it's animated, you don't know where he comes from when it comes to the flag on his chest, but he has an American accent. He does, so I'm going to assume it's an American character again, but if for all I do not know, that means, either way, the first 4 seasons of Classic Who had Americans in it the entire time and included us Americans in things to give a sense of international respect as well as national pride. Remember, the classic show, National Pride, found that delicate balance between national pride and international inclusion. Classic Who found it from the very beginning. And then in the second Doctor's last season, we have the War Games. We have an African-American soldier who fought in the Civil War. And that was a pretty big deal at the time, the idea of an African-American character being in Doctor Who. So, there you go. We were always there. And then the third Doctor's era, this is where we begin to see a good idea of American characters. Dwindle is in the fourth Doctor's era, but it's still in the third Doctor's era. The first season of the third Doctor's era happens, but when the second season occurs, they have a bit of a bigger budget. So what they do? In the Mind of Evil, they have the American ambassador who came to be a part of the embassy or came part of the peace negotiations. So we have an American character. But in the next episode, we have the Claws of Axos, where now that the third Doctor is consistently working with the British government under UNIT, he's called out for not being a British citizen. And he is called to question. Seriously, go back and watch The Claws of Axos. This is written by 2 British writers. The Doctor is not a British citizen, so he's called out for this, and he has to go and answer to this complaint about him not being British. Because this is forgotten, the Doctor is not British. He's an alien from Gallifrey. When he goes there, you see the third Doctor get very angry because he is being questioned about this. He's like, what does it matter? I am not British. Also, he makes it very clear from the very beginning that he does not enjoy the idea of Britain being for the British. What I mean by that is he respects British pride and all that, but he's very clear, when the one character says to him, well, I have a duty to my country, and the third Doctor turns around and says, but not to the world. He makes it very clear to everyone he is not against any country. He is not against including any country. What he's against is exclusion, because someone is not from your country, and that includes Americans, he is against the idea of excluding that person. He does not support exclusion even with Americans. Keep this in mind, because we're going to get to you very soon, Stephen Moffat and Peter Capaldi, when we talk about Series 8. Okay, so then as the third Doctor season and the fourth Doctor seasons progress, it becomes more oriented around no longer having American characters in it, but that's because the show begins to go more into outer space, and you just stick with the clientele, the cast, the casting pool of your local area. But that doesn't mean it's anti-American. No, it just means working with your casting pool. And that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to do that. Have mostly British actors. No, perfectly good. But then we have 1980s rolls around, and we've got Peter Davison as the Doctor. In Peter Davison's last season, we get an American companion by Perry. She's played by a British actress, but it's fine. I'm perfectly fine with it. I like Nicole Bryant. Yes, so Perry is an American character, and now she's going to go on and be a companion on the TARDIS. Boom, she goes into the 6th Doctor's era. Then the 7th Doctor's era happens, and we have American references to American characters in Delta and the Bannermen. I believe in a couple other places as well, like Silver Nemesis. So it was made very evident throughout the entirety of classic show. This is a British institution. Doctor Who is a British institution, and it's about, there's a sense of, national pride there, but it always had international inclusion at the same time. Walked that fine line, found that line, and walked it proudly. Then we get to the movie, Doctor Who the movie in the 90s, where this is where people begin, I think, this is where they really began the idea of, oh, Americans and Doctor Who, this is terrible. Doctor Who's the movie, as we know, took place in America, but this is where websites are constantly saying the idea of this being the American Doctor Who is muddied. Because, guys, the person who wrote Doctor Who the movie was not American, it's another British writer. The writer who wrote for Doctor Who the movie is the son of the actor who played Doc Holliday in The Gunfighters. So the writer is a British writer. Not only is it disrespectful to say it shows how Americans could not write Doctor Who, but we never wrote Doctor Who, the movie. It was a British person who did. But it's also disrespectful to the British person who did. I don't think he was trying to Americanize Doctor Who. I know people are still going to say, oh, it's the American influence on this British writer, so America's still at fault. No, it's not. Guys, we can't control how you guys write us. We really can't control how you guys write us. And I don't think he was trying to Americanize Doctor Who. I think he was trying to modernize it and bring it to the 90s and make it popular again. And if you actually go back and look at the ratings, he was successful. Doctor Who the movie did very well when it came to ratings, and even did get some good reviews. It's just because of fandom's attitude to it now, of it being absolutely awful, that people forget that actually it was successful initially. The movie was quite successful upon transmission, original transmission. Yes, but remember, please, guys, the writer who wrote Doctor Who the movie is a British person. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not against him writing the movie. I wish to God he did not do certain things, like the idea of the Doctor being half human, but I still respect the rest of the story where it was good. Then we have the Russell T Davies era, where there was American influences from the very beginning. Season 1 and 2, the idea of the Doctor having a romantic connection with his companion who was a teenage girl, was completely inspired by Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Russell T Davies never denied that there were American influences on Doctor Who when he did start the show. Then we got Series 3, where the Doctor full-on goes to America in the two-parter, The Dogs in Manhattan two-parter. Then by the end of the 3rd season, we have the President of the United States appear in Doctor Who. In Series 4, we have American references as well, where Americans were supposed to help the England when there was that problem, but unfortunately America got taken over by the Adipose. So a lot of problems kept happening at one time. So we have the Russell T Davies era, which is called the Golden Era. A lot of fans call it the Golden Era of Doctor Who, but the Golden Era of Doctor Who had American... Every season was in some way, shape, or form had American references or American connections or American influences. But this often gets forgotten when we get to the Moffat era. And Series 5 was the season that, unless you were dead set against liking Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor, and Stephen Moffat, overall, people do love that season. Then Series 6 happened, where it was said that Moffat really wanted to conquer American audiences, so we had the Doctor Who take place in America. And this is where the complaints began. This is not fair to Moffat, because, again, Americans, Doctor Who has had visits to America since 1960s, and in Russell T Davies' era, the Doctor went to America as well. But here's what's going to happen. After you make all these, to like tell people this, their response is always going to be back. This happens all the time. I just realized I'm giving you guys a script to say. This is how often this happened to me. They're going to say, well, you don't understand. With all the research I've done, it shows how Moffat was trying to take over and conquer American audiences, and that was the problem for all of us. For us in the Doctor Who. That was a big mistake from trying to take over American audiences. And they always say that back to you. That's what they usually say back. Here's where your reply can be. First, you can say, look at all these examples I gave you showing how Americans were always connected to the show to begin with. Number one. Number two, were you there for every single interview from 1963 or every single board meeting, every single time the writers and the producers talked in the classic show from 1963 till Russell T Davies era? Were you there for every single individual meeting that took place at the BBC? So how do you know that whatever Moffat was trying to do in his era was not something that they wanted in the classic show? In even Russell T Davies' era? How do you know? Until you can sit through every single meeting in 1963 onward, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. So it's not fair to blame Moffat for something that, for all we know, or get mad at Moffat for including Americans when, for all we know, especially due to all the evidence before now that maybe people in the show were doing before. And also, the idea of Doctor Who appealing to Americans has always been on the table. If you go back to the 1980s and you look at Colin Baker and Patrick Troughton, when they came to America and did interviews when they were at the convention, they had private interviews too, and they're on YouTube. You can look them up on YouTube where Patrick Troughton and Colin Baker had interviews here in America. They made it very clear they wanted Americans and they liked the idea of Americans watching their show. They were flattered that Americans did, and they really wanted them to really enjoy it. And Patrick Troughton made it very evident he really wanted Americans to get to know his Doctor because he was from the 60s. And Patrick Troughton was so much about this that he ignored his doctors and came to America even though his doctor said, "You are sick, Patrick. You can die if you don't slow down." Patrick Troughton, the actor who played the second Doctor, didn't care. Came to America knowing he was still a little ill, and he died here in America while he was on a convention. Patrick Troughton. People often forget that Patrick spent his last moments with us here in America, and that means a lot to me. Patrick, I love you. So yes, this idea of wanting Americans to like Doctor Who and appeal to Americans and even include Americans has been there from the 60s. So to all of a sudden now be angry at Americans being in Doctor Who doesn't really make any sense, because it's you putting your own personal feelings on Doctor Who without seeing what Doctor Who really was. And the Doctor himself is an alien from Gallifrey. He does not, even though he doesn't like us humans sometimes, he does not make mass generalizations. So it wasn't fair to get mad at Moffat for wanting to take over or conquer American audiences when all that can do is only increase the audience and therefore increase the success of the show and make it more popular, when that was possibly happening all along with people wanting Americans to also enjoy the show while still being a very solid British institution. You can have national pride and still have international inclusion at the same time. Then we have Series 8, where we have the Matt Smith era, where it's very evident that the Doctor Who goes to America in the last 2 seasons and is perfectly fine with Americans. Then Series 8 happens. Oh my god. And we get the end of Series 8 where Peter Capaldi, the 12th Doctor, literally says about Americans, he's like, about how when Americans are not there in the finale, he says, good. Americans, like, something like, Americans shouldn't be here anyway. All they do is pray. He literally, with that line, excluded Americans. It made it very clear he did not want Americans there. This is a stark contrast to Moffat in Series 5 through 7, to the point where it makes me wonder if Moffat was influenced by what was happening in the fandom at the time. But I'll save that for part 2 of this video because we're going on a little bit too long. Thank you guys so much for watching. You're wonderful. I hope to see you again in the next video. And again, I have no anti-British sentiments at all in this video. I admire Great Britain for all of the contributions it's given to the world and its great entertainment. Everything about it I respect. I'm just calling it out on bigotry. It's bigotry, and I think we all can rise above it, including especially when it comes to Doctor Who. But we'll talk about that in part 2. See you guys again very soon. Please refrain your comments if you wish to. If you have any judgments, watch part 2 first. Thanks, guys. See you soon. Bye, guys.